Never, ever before in history has there been so much stuff. There is stuff everywhere. There's big stuff, there's little stuff, there's hidden stuff, there's out stuff. We've got stuff just everywhere all the time. And we're not even satisfied with our stuff because we're continually in a mode of trying to acquire more stuff. It's become a thing in our generation. We're constantly after more stuff. All this stuff. We go out and we buy bigger houses to store our stuff. And we've got rooms in our houses that are designated just for stuff. Like, what am I talking about? Well, we've had closets, we have attics, we even have garages for our stuff. You know, garages are supposed to be for cars, aren't they? Does anyone know someone whose garages are filled with stuff? So much stuff that they can't even get their cars in there anymore? I know people like that. I know some people that have little pathways through their garages, through all their stuff. The car is sitting out front. Can't get the car in there anymore. Stuff is everywhere. All this stuff. Never in history have we been fascinated with so much stuff. In fact, there's even so much stuff that we don't even know what to do with all of our stuff anymore. We can't even get our minds around what to do with all this stuff. In the past few decades, there is an entirely new industry that has evolved from this inability to do things with our stuff. What am I talking about? There are now companies who will rent you 5 by 8 or 10 by 10 or 10 by 20 spaces on their property to keep your stuff. And so we fill these storage rooms with this stuff. More stuff. Stuff is everywhere. You know, they even climate control some of these places so that in case when you go back to see your stuff, which might not be for a long time, we don't want it to be musty smelling, so they air condition these. And we put elaborate security systems on these storage places because, well, we don't want anybody to steal our stuff, the stuff that we don't want to keep in our own house. Stuff is everywhere. We're piling all this stuff up. Stuff, stuff, stuff. You know, one of the early companies in this business is the Public Storage Company. You guys know that name? The company has $10 billion of assets now. $10 billion. They got started in the 60s. They have 2,300 facilities across the United States. Not surprisingly, they are projecting future growth. Why? Because we're all out acquiring more stuff. Keep getting more stuff. Incidentally, their stock ticker symbol is PSA, and they trade for $200 a share. Think about that one. All that to just store our stuff. You know, I think it's an interesting study of modern human behavior to understand why it is that we accumulate so much stuff. And by the way, I'm not talking about hoarding either. That's an entirely different thing that has psychological issues that have to be dealt with in a special way, you know, with special counseling. No. I'm talking about the average one of us. Just good old us. We all do this to some extent or another. And you would be tempted to think that accumulating all this stuff would only be for those who, well, could afford the stuff, right? That were wealthy. Oh no. Even those who don't have a lot of money accumulate stuff. And they won't let go of this stuff. It's very interesting. Anyone who has lived with me, especially my children, Know that I am a neat person. I don't like clutter. I keep a clean house. I don't go to bed with dishes in the sink. No one has ever had to tell me to pick up my socks or underwear. I am available, ladies. I give credit for those habits to my parents. My mother kept a very clean home, and she expected anyone that lived there was going to keep that house clean too. And my father is very neat too. Now, interestingly enough, my siblings, I have a younger brother and sister, they didn't acquire these skills. I don't know what happened with them, but they've gone out to be adults, and well, it's not quite the same over at their houses. We all have too much stuff, and someone after my own heart once said that cleanliness is next to godliness. I like that phrase. Now, by now, you're all probably thinking, this sermon must have something to do with acquiring too much stuff and keeping a clean house, all that. Don't jump to that conclusion just yet. Hang on with me a little while longer. There's a lady who has gained some notoriety recently for cleaning up stuff. And her name is Marie Kondo. She's a Japanese woman. And I read her book some months ago, probably about 6 months ago. The title of her book is called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. Now, being the kind of person I am, that sounded like a good title I wanted to read. So I got the book and I read it. Little did I know that within a couple of weeks after I had finished reading this book, I would hear of this woman because she now has a Netflix program on television where her program is all about the subject of tidying up. On her TV show, that has now become a national craze, by the way, Miss Kondo is invited to people's homes to be a consultant. Before she arrives there, they interview these people, and these people have become so overwhelmed with their stuff, they aren't even able to live properly anymore. It's amazing. They are overcome with it. Their marriages are stressed. In some cases, these people have become physically ill because they can't handle their stuff. It's piled everywhere. And she goes in there to help and advise these people on how to declutter and clean up and organize their homes. It's an interesting little program. For the record, I'm not a 100% proponent of Miss Kondo. She has some spiritual leanings that aren't necessarily what I agree with. She actually adheres to the Shinto religion, and as such, she applies spiritual attributes to inanimate objects. Okay? So, all of that aside. All of that aside, she does have some very solid principles, very solid, that I think apply to human nature and human behavior. In fact, as I read her book, I couldn't help but to see these principles as an application in our spiritual lives as well. Very interesting. So, do we have stuff laying around in our spiritual lives that shouldn't be there? Do we have too much spiritual stuff? Do we have stuff that we no longer need? Do we have stuff that we shouldn't have anymore? Just shouldn't have it. Have we put stuff away in our spiritual closets and our storage rooms because we just didn't want to deal with it anymore? We do that to our physical stuff. Did we do it in our spiritual lives as well? You know, as I read her book, I was feeling inspired about writing a sermon. So as I read along, I took notes and I grasped some of Miss Kondo's quotes that I'll share with you. One of the principles that she mentioned about these people, that all of us that do this kind of thing, is she said, basically says there's three kind of people. There are people that will not throw things away. They won't throw it away. There is another type of person who doesn't know how to put things back where they belong. Right? And the third type of person is a combination of both of those. They won't throw it away, and they don't put it back where it belongs. Three kind of people. Interesting how that is. And I can see how these same types of people are in our spiritual lives as well. How many people just won't throw away a sin that they've been holding on to? How many? They keep committing that sin. No matter how old it is, it just hangs around. How about that? Oh, here's one. Here's one that I see in a lot of spiritual houses. How many people won't let go of a problem that they had in a church 50 years ago? How many? Wow. I see them all the time. Sound familiar? You know, the second type, they won't put their sins where they belong. How does that work? Well, they won't admit that their sins belong to themselves. Right? They want to blame this circumstance or that person. They always shift those things around rather than putting them where they belong, on themselves. And just like Ms. Kondo said, there are those who do both of these things. Right? Ms. Kondo had quite a few little sayings in her book, and I want to read them to you. These are some that I wrote down. Listen to these. It is human nature to resist throwing something away when we know that we should. People don't change their habits without changing their thinking. The true goal of tidying is lifestyle change. We should keep only what we love and enjoy and discard the rest. Some things and people in our lives have already fulfilled their role. Many people live surrounded by things they don't need just because. They thrive on the clutter and the chaos. It's interesting. To put your things in order means to put your past in order too. Holding on to things makes it more likely that you will miss new opportunities and new relationships. The question of what you want to own is actually the question of how you want to live your life. The best way to find out what we really need is to get rid of what we don't. And there was one more, and I really like this one because it sums it all up. This is what she said. The space in which we live should be for the person we are becoming now, not the person that we were in the past. I really like that one. It's very fitting in a spiritual context, isn't it? Right? Our spiritual house should only be filled with the stuff of our new relationship with God. Everything else should be thrown out. Right? So just for a moment, in your mind's eye, take a look around your spiritual house. What do you see there? Is it cluttered with things that shouldn't be there? Is it cluttered with sins that, well, they just need to be thrown out? Open up the closets. Look in the drawers. What's stored up in that attic? How long has that stuff been sitting there? How long are you going to hold on to it? You know, spiritual clutter in our minds can take on a whole lot of different forms. Let's let Paul remind us of some of those things. Turn over to Romans, please. Romans 1. Romans 1, beginning in verse 29. They have become filled, our spiritual houses. They have become with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They are ruthless, senseless, faithless, heartless. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. Just won't throw it away. We resist that. Do we have any of those things still laying around in our lives? Shouldn't be there. Are they tucked away in those rooms that we don't go into anymore? We try to forget them, but I'll get to that later. Is that what we do? Remember what Miss Kondo said. It is human nature to resist throwing something away when we know we should. Right? Yeah. She also said, people don't change their habits without changing their thinking. They go right back and do the same things again. Yeah, it's true. We all do it. She's absolutely right. And the Apostle Paul says that she's right. The carnal human nature resists tidying up the spiritual house. It resists the things of God. Turn over a little bit, a few pages to Romans 8. Romans 8, beginning in verse 5. Those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what the nature desires, because it's all around them. Can't get rid of that stuff. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind of sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. The sinful mind is hostile. It resists God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those controlled by the sinful nature cannot please God. If our spiritual houses are cluttered up with all this nasty stuff, we're not pleasing God. That carnal human nature has got to be brought into submission to the Spirit. It means cleaning out the spiritual houses of our minds and hearts. We have to change our thinking. Something's got to change. Turn over to Ephesians. Ephesians 4, beginning in verse 17. So I tell you this, and, I like this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality, so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more, just like us, continually wanting more stuff. You, however, did not come to know Christ that way. Surely you heard of him and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life, all that other stuff, to put off, to throw away the old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, each of you must throw away falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor, for we are members of one body. We've got to stop holding on to those old selves. The attitudes, behaviors, and characteristics of that carnal Gentile person have to be thrown out. We have to decorate our spiritual houses for the person we are becoming now, not the person that we were in the past. How are we going to start this? That's no easy task, is it? How are we going to start this monumental process? Miss Kondo, in her TV show and in her books, you can check this out for yourself. What she does, she has a systematic approach to this. What she does to begin with when she comes into a house, first step is she addresses clothing. Boy, that's an interesting one, right? She addresses clothing. And she instructs them, go get every single garment that is in this house, closets, drawers, everywhere. Bring it all, pile it in the middle of the room. Now, you would be surprised at the amount of clothes in there. In fact, the people that do this, they're surprised at the amount of stuff they've got piled up in the middle of the room. Then she instructs them, you stand over this pile, and you pick up every single garment, and you look at this garment, and you say, does this garment bring me joy in my life? Is it good for me? And if it's not, throw it away. If it does, then she keeps those. She goes through that entire process with them. Now, I think we should do something similar. I think that we should look around at all the stuff, all the spiritual stuff that we have scattered and cluttered around in our lives. Get it all out of the closets. Get it all out of the drawers and out of the attic and out of the garage. And pile it up. Take a good, hard look at how big that pile really is. And then we should pick up these things and examine them with this particular scripture in mind. It's Philippians 4. Philippians 4, beginning in verse 8. Whatever, of all this stuff we're looking at, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. We put those in the to keep pile. We want those things, right? Whatever you have learned or have heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. Keep the good things. Throw away the bad things. Anything that doesn't meet that criteria, we need to throw it out of our lives. Needs to get out, needs to go. As we go through this process, we will become better and better at knowing what to keep and what to throw out. And here's another interesting thing if we will do this. We will also get better at knowing what we should bring home and what we shouldn't be bringing home. Keep it out of the house. Right? Now, I really do think that we need to get busy on this. We need to get busy because there's a guest coming. Houses, isn't there? Turn over to John 14. John 14, verse 23. If anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching. He'll keep the good stuff. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. God wants to come and live in our home with us. So, when he comes and knocks on the door, we open that door to let him in, what's he going to find in our house? What's he going to find in our spiritual house? Will it be tidy? Will the sins be thrown out? Will it be clean and decorated in a manner worthy of the Creator of all things? We don't want to be embarrassed by anything in there, do we? We have a lot of work. I think we better get busy quickly. You know, just a very short time from now, the days of unleavened bread are going to come. Isn't the whole ideal behind the days of unleavened bread the throwing out, the tidying of our spiritual house? Sure it is. Sure it is. We get the leaven out of our houses. That's what it's all about. We need to get busy. We need to get busy. You know, I want to thank my parents for instilling in me the habits of being tidy and clean. You know, in my mother's house, it was well understood that everything had a place and it ought to be in its place. She lived that way. I kind of got that from her. Through that practice, I also learned a valuable lesson that has helped me in this life. Miss Kondo worded it this way. She said, when your house is clean, you have no choice but to examine the inner state. Now, what did she mean by that? What she meant by that, and what I've learned in this life, is that when you keep your outside physical things in order, you have more time and more energy to focus on the far more important spiritual things. It's just that way in life. We've only got so much time. I want to encourage us all to go home and start looking around in our spiritual houses. Get to work. Make them tidy. Throw away things that should not be there. And I assure you, if we will do it, it will be a changing experience.